So we will be recording. My name is Tracy Bilski, and I'm with the Friends of Buttonhook Forest. And we are thrilled to have you here tonight for a presentation with Marina Heron, who is an artist, scholar, and organizer developing Soil and Spirit, which is a large-scale, site-specific kinetic installation that will travel to endangered forests across the country and connect diverse communities to the histories and spirits of place. And we are thrilled to have had her visit us here in Chappaqua, New York, at Valley Ridge at Buttonhook Forest, a place that we are working to preserve for the future generations. And we are thrilled, Marina, that you're here and look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Thanks so much to everybody on this evening. You know, I'm sure all of us have a lot going on, but this is an important cause, and it's a pleasure to kind of share some of what I hope is my contribution to the Buttonhook effort. I want to share that I'm speaking to you from Brooklyn, Lenape Hoking, and I am Russian born, so my ancestry goes back to Russia, and I just want to acknowledge tonight that Russian colonialism is unfortunately alive and well. And so solidarity with the people of Ukraine and also those suffering under Putin's regime. So I have to invoke that this evening. Can you hear me okay? Is the signal okay? All right. So this is a kind of unique in-process introduction to a way of working that that I'm developing with a team for a project called Soil and Spirit. And Tracy, if we could share the screen, we can kind of dive right into a slideshow. But what my primary goal, oh, I don't know if that's sharing correctly. Are folks seeing this? I'll keep speaking while we kind of make that work. So Soil and Spirit is both a process and an outcome, right? To connect communities to the specificities of place. And there's a unique kind of combination and synergy that's happening in this work between the artistic practices and scientific practices. But the reason that I wanted to offer this in this moment is because there is a series of commitments and obligations that Soil and Spirit has to specific communities. And it is working with particular elements, which are the choreographies of soils, mycorrhizal fungi, and roots. And out of that, we're developing a visual vocabulary. And I have taken roots from Buttonhook, and it is my obligation to share back some of the insight and knowledge that I gained from some of that work. So this is really in process. You know, you're kind of like getting a glimpse, peeling back behind the curtain to see how this work is coming to be and what this work is about. So if we could go to the next slide. So Tracy introduced this well. Soil and Spirit is a participatory choreographic invocation of the spirits and histories of place through a site-specific, large-scale kinetic installation in endangered forests. And puppets is in quote because puppet can sometimes wake up imaginings that may or may not fit with what Soil and Spirit is. But puppetry is a beautiful art form. We go on to the next slide. So these are the three communities that Soil and Spirit holds obligations to. The disabled and chronically ill community, of which I am a member. Indigenous communities, of which I hope and strive to be an ally to. For, as I mentioned, I am young to this land, right? I am here one generation. Some people have been here maybe 3 generations, 4 generations, 400, 500 years. But there are those whose ancestors go back to this land 14,000 years. And so unless we are in that category and you identify in that way, The rest of us are young to this land. And there's a kind of knowing and intimacy and priority that precedent demands, and that Soil and Spirit seeks to uphold, and which is critical for Indigenous sovereignty, and to be a quote unquote good ally, right? And then of course, the very important third community obligation is the communities who are local to each forest, both the human community and the more than human, right? Which is why there's a little plus right there. And so, and here for tonight, that is, of course, the Friends of Buttonhook Forest, who are truly doing incredible work in something that is long overdue, and that I think, as many of us here tonight, feel a deep passion for, due to the importance of what is happening in Chappaqua right now around this forest. We can move on to the next slide. So reciprocity and symbiosis. We'll talk about, I'll actually show you give you a little brief overview of what I have come to learn of mycorrhizae, and mycorrhizae, which are symbiotic relationships, right, between fungi and roots in forests. But it is my reciprocity to give back to the Friends of Buttonhook community, because I have taken from the forest. And there is a certain, it is just simply that it's no one's asked me to do this. It's kind of a give and take, right? So in this reciprocal way, I hope sets the tone for what, for how to heal some of the relational breaks that have happened, and that happened so much. And we can move on to the next slide. So there I am in Buttonhook Forest, taking some roots. Tracy was standing right next to me. And here are the roots in jars. Those are not just from Buttonhook, they are from also from the Adirondacks. And so, but I didn't just come into this forest and take. And we'll get into, I'll share a little bit about the kind of consent protocols that I'm developing in partnership with a team at Duke University, and also in partnership and in dialogue with Mohawk Nipmuc medicine and culture keeper Noham Rolf Kasha-Chilling, whom I have been in dialogue with and asked about how to approach this work in the right way, and has received their blessing. And that's an incredibly important aspect of everything that I'm presenting. And the blessing is not just words, right? It was a very concrete kind of action, that the action of this work is being done well. And without Noham's support in that way, this talk would not happen, and this work would not move forward with this community and at this location. We can move on to the next slide. Also, I want to say that at any point that you have a question, please put it in the chat, and we'll hope to have 10 minutes definitely for a Q&A and kind of a conversation at the end. But so I wanted to just rewind a little bit to how Soil and Spirit came to be, where the idea birthed from. And what you're seeing here is an earlier, it's called the Dream Puppet from 2021. Oh, actually, I'm just going to pause for 1 second. A friend of mine just texted no link. I'm not sure what that means. Maybe some folks didn't get the Zoom link, in which case I guess we'll share the recording. So moving on. So this piece here was made for Soil and Spirit is grows from this work. But this work is different because this work was made, Dream Puppet was made for, in part for a magazine cover, right? And we can move on to the next slide. And I was playing with this kind of choreography and visual vocabulary of wheels and strings. but as I thought about what a soil and spirit is about, right? How does a figure, what can this figure look like to meet the spirits and histories of place, right? To do the kind of weaving that's needed. I started to look in other directions, and I found myself at roots, soils, and mycorrhizal fungi, and realized that there is such a mysterious, beautiful, largely unknown world beneath our feet that maintains quite literally the foundations of our ecosystems and lifeways, and that potentially can offer vocabularies for how to construct a different image, right? So for this Orion piece, it was specifically an issue focused on disability justice. And so this figure harkens to somebody in a wheelchair, right? Kind of. But soil and spirit will be quite different. But this image of a figure in the forest, I think, is resonant. So with that, searching for a new vocabulary, let's move on to the next slide. The choreographies of root, soil, fungi, entanglements. Now, it's been an incredible, we're very early in this process, and it's been pretty incredible just to get to witness through a microscope up close these microscopic presences and start to get a feel for them. And this is all very early, and I'll be sharing specifically some of the fungal mycorrhizal presences that are at Buttonhook that we observed. So on to the next slide. So a little bit kind of mycorrhizae 101. And here I want to very much thank Jake Nash, who's a PhD student working in Dr. Ritas Vogalis's fungi lab at Duke University, of whose benefit I was the recipient of, and therefore, and not just I, but our team at Duke, and I pass it on to you. So something important to just establish from the top, right, is that there are a lot of different kinds of fungi, right? Mycorrhizal fungi really speaks to the relationship between fungi and plants and trees when they are symbiotic. So mycorrhizal really describes a symbiotic relationship as opposed to like a fungus itself, right? And the way it happens is that the tree takes in life, photosynthesizes carbon, turns it into sugar that it gives to the fungus. And the fungus in turn connects to the roots of the tree in different ways, different mycorrhizal associations, and gives back nutrients. Right, so that's a symbiotic exchange. There's also communication, of course, that happens, and probably a lot of mysterious things that are left open to our imaginations. And so, just right on the right here is a little pine sapling, and what you're seeing right there is a mycelial web, and mycelia are like the mycelium is this network of the fungus that grows outwards, and some can be very short, some can be very long. I'll cover that a little bit, but just so you have kind of an immediate image, and particularly with pines, you can see the mycelium like just underneath the surface of leaves, just like underneath the forest floor. It's really pretty extraordinary. So on to the next slide. So as I said, there's kind of like different these are the fungal guilds, and as you see that the mycorrhizae are one guild, right? And there's the endophytes and the decomposers, and the three others. Something fascinating that I recently learned because of this art science collaboration, right, is that mycorrhizal fungi actually evolved from decomposers, right? So millions of years ago, there are these mushrooms and fungi that are they create soil, right? They eat wood and plant pathogens, and at some point evolutionarily, there were 80 unique evolutions, at least 80 that are known, in which a mycorrhizal symbiotic relationship evolved out of a decomposing relationship, right? So the fungus had to really learn how to be a good guest within the tree roots and within the plant roots, because it could no longer eat its host, right? Because that would not be a good not a good act of symbiosis. And it actually had to give up some of its decomposer genes and gain communication genes. And that part of the research apparently within the scientific community is very early. So mycorrhizae are just one form of fungus, fungal connection that's possible. On to the next slide. So here, there's actually we get to see a little bit what we've been searching for and what I've been searching for soil and spirit, which is what I'm calling this the choreography and architectures of this symbiosis, right? And there's two main kinds of mycorrhizal fungi, and they're broken up based off of how they interface with the roots. So that ectomycorrhizal fungi versus the arbuscular fungi. And the difference is, as you kind of look at this, kind of very mechanical graph, is that in the ectomycorrhizal fungi, yeah, exactly right where Tracy's arrow was, the fungus penetrates the root, but it doesn't penetrate the actual plant cells, versus in the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungus, the fungus comes right into the cell, and it like penetrates directly, and it tends to grow these kind of tree, what are called arbuscules, right? So if you move on to the next slide, that's actually some visualizations of microscopy, not that I have done, and this is not from Buttonhook, right? But this is just so you have a sense of it. So this hard egg net, what you're seeing on the left here is a cross section of a root, and the mycorrhizal association is typically at the very tips of the roots, so very far down, and the very thin, just a few millimeters wide. And so this is a cross section, and you'll see basically there's a fungus moving in between the cells, these round kind of white areas. Versus on the right, here are those tree growths where the fungus is directly penetrating the cells and growing like a little mini tree inside the root cells, and creating a different kind of symbiotic relationship. Pretty extraordinary. So on to the next slide. And here's just a different, better image of that arbuscule. So this is two patterns, right, to see how this symbiosis is happening. We can move on to the next slide. Another example, just to start getting kind of visualization of it, and up on the top right corner is Jake Nash, who is the one who, from whom I got some of this very smart information that I'm able to pass on to you. But so again, this is a cross section of a root, and a root is just a few millimeters wide, right? And those circles are the cells. And here the ectomycorrhizal fungus is growing and penetrating between the cells, and the arbuscular is penetrating directly into the cell and like creating these arbuscules, these kind of mini tree growths. And the arbusculars are, I believe, the oldest of the mycorrhizal associations. We can move on to the next slide. When I found this, we found this image this summer because of a Story Plus residency, and actually I have a colleague and dear collaborator on this call through a program called Story Plus. And we found this image then, and I was really taken by it. You can imagine an entire dance choreographed off of this pattern right here, right? And this is a different kind of mycorrhizae. It's called an ericoid mycorrhizal fungus. It's less common, a little bit less common, I believe. but something that I learned from Jake, which comes to show, thinking about access and how to make scientific knowledge accessible, or how to even bridge and work interdisciplinarily. The kind of microscopy work with a microscope that an image like this takes costs thousands of dollars. To get such precision, such visualization, and such kind of clarity in this cross section. So that was really kind of eye-opening, realizing that it's incredibly expensive, and also some really toxic chemicals to get such visualization. And also we have, as artists, our incredible embodied imagery sense memory. And maybe we shouldn't be looking at these so close. I don't know. If they are so resistant to being observed and they like being deep down in the soil, maybe we should not bring them so much up into the public gaze. Just a kind of a thought there. But we can move on to the next slide. And so here, these are, again, obviously this is Jake Nash I did a recording with him, which is where these stills are coming from, for my team at Duke. And these are it's one way of thinking about ectomycorrhizal fungi associations, which is by how far their mycelial web grows, right? So when you saw kind of all that web coming out of the pine, that's a long distance exploration of the mycelia. But there are different, one way of thinking about how do you make sense of this, right, is how close or far the mycelial web grows. Something really interesting, and I think quite relevant for buttonhook and the effort there in terms of the ecological preservation and importance of keeping our mature forests and minimizing the disturbance that we have and we enact upon land, is that when researchers have studied forest succession, right? So when a forest grows back, these shorter range, smooth and short distance explorations, they're the ones that are present in the younger forests. These medium and long distance mycorrhizae and mycelial webs are present later, at least 70 or 80 years into a forest's age, if not more. So that's why old growth forests have these incredible connections, but they take time, and disturbing the soil, like for example, by building a bunch of condos upon land, you are setting back ecological processes by at least 80 to 100 years, but also it's not like you can replace one life world and one interwoven community with another as if it's just, right? So I think we need to all be very careful about the impact we make upon the land. So on to the next slide. I'm seeing comments, let me see what's happening there. Oh, you're so welcome. So so that was the extent of my science, and I'm happy to share more as more comes in. That was necessary in order for us to be able to for me to even make sense of what I'm looking at, right? Is to begin to understand. And mind you, even researchers and mycologists know very little actually about the fungal world. About 2% of fungi are known out of the total. So this is a young field. But here I want to make a turn, and as directly connected to the practices of soil and spirit, and share back with you the way that bring in artistic inquiry that has very particular ethical commitments, changes how practice is done. So what is an anti-extractive practice? We can go on to the next slide. I'm going to share with you the consent protocol that I followed when I was choosing roots, when I was taking roots in soils from the earth. This was both at Buttonhook and in the Adirondacks, which is the two areas that I have so far engage this work with. Soil and Spirit will be traveling from forest to forest. It is a long-term work for over a decade, if not more. But what I'm about to share with you really only makes sense if we have, I might say, allowed ourselves to perceive that the earth speaks and that the land is sentient, and that we are not outside of the more than human living world, but deeply embedded and interconnected. And so, because I think some of these things will simply not make sense if one doesn't hold this position. And if you don't hold this position, I welcome you to consider opening yourself to this perspective, because it's difficult, I think, to really grasp what colonialism has done, and the force that it has had in the ecological crisis, and what the destruction of Indigenous sovereignty and Indigenous knowledge is made of. So we can move on to the next slide. The consent protocols. Onto the next slide. So this is what I did, and then I wrote it out when choosing these routes. I came to a place where I saw a potential area that had a mycorrhizal presence. And I pause, I close my eyes, and I connect to my breath and body. And then I feel and listen whether this particular place is creating a sense of openness or pushing me out away. There have been areas that push me out and I move on. It's not for me. If I know it, I speak the Indigenous name of the land. If I don't know it, I ask for the name of this place. I thank the forest, the intention of gratitude. And I express my intention for why I am taking something from the land and for what purposes. And I am continually checking in with my sensory body and mind, and feeling, am I feeling a sense of a permission, a kind of yes, openness, in which case I can move on to the next step. If I'm feeling a no, it's not the place to collect from. If I'm feeling unsure, I continue asking. I stay with that uncertainty, and clarity may not arrive. And if clarity did not arrive, that means that a yes has not yet been given. I'm pausing here because I realize how radically different this is from how our cultural norms enact action upon land. And that's part of why this is so important. Ideally, consent protocols would be cultural and generational, but we do not have that. So we need to start on an individual and community level. And Soil and Spirit is developing a set of practices, and anybody, any person or community that Soil and Spirit is interfacing with, this will be part of the way that this piece comes to be. Also attend to the ecological sensitivity, just the kind of just basic knowledge of asking, is this little sapling of a tree likely to grow old, right? Because, there's only so many trees that can grow in a particular region. I see the Rodman Kimmer. Absolutely. I think Kimmer is a wonderful kind of entrance point into this thinking. My thinking has, beyond Kimmer, there's wonderful scholars and excellent called M.A. Kangiser and Zoe Todd, who focus on this and have articulated these. I'm deeply influenced by them. Same thing with Leanne Simpson. Same thing with, I have run through this consent protocol with Noham, who holds ancestral connection to this land, who is a top scholar and an archaeologist of sacred sites. And they expressed that this is in the right direction, right? That this is good. This is right. We also gave further guidance, but this is the practice that I enacted when I was taking soils from Buttonhook. And actually Tracy was standing right next to me, and I have no idea if she knew what I was doing. But this is what was happening. Now you have it as a bullet list. Yeah, absolutely. I'll put it in the chat. We can move on to the next slide. AM Kangizer and Zoe Todd. So pause, Buttonhook Forest is an indigenous ceremonial stone landscape. If you Google indigenous ceremonial stone landscape, you will find some very interesting talks and publications that articulate, that give some suggestions and have done thorough research on what these locations are. It has been confirmed by multiple communities, by multiple indigenous communities, that the area that is now called Buttonhook is an indigenous ceremonial stone landscape. And one thing to not understand, for us who are, and I will only speak for myself because I don't know who ultimately will be listening to this, but for any of us who are not indigenous to this land and who do not hold native lineage, sacred sites were chosen very carefully that had an ecological importance as well as cultural and spiritual. It was all together. So there is a reason that the waters come together in Chappaqua, and that this site was designated as such. So the sensitivity and protocols of bringing a work like Soil and Spirit to even think about bringing a piece like that here are pretty high. And again, without my conversations with Noham, I would not be moving forward. And Soil and Spirit will be forming a Indigenous and Disability Advisory Councils to be in constant conversation with each community that is ancestrally tied to a particular forest area where Soil and Spirit is going. So on to the next slide. So the choreographies of root soil fungi entanglements at Buttonhook/Valley Ridge. We're getting closer to some of the things that I think I've promised you here. You can move on to the next slide. So this is an agreement that I ask of everybody here, which is that the following images of mycorrhizal life worlds are an early glimpse into a growing living archive for Soil and Spirit, out of which a new artistic work will be made. Their use by others, by any of you, is permitted only for purposes that support Indigenous sovereignty and by those who commit to specific consent protocols. And you can contact me for more information. We are creating a kind of library and living archive. This is the beginning of it. But my goal, and it is a very difficult one to achieve, which is to maintain such an ethics of practice, embodied commitment throughout the whole life cycle of the work across every layer. Do you know what that's going to take? A lot of time, energy, and attention. So I ask the same of you for anyone who engages with this material. On to the next slide. There were two locations that I took these roots from. They were early in the forest. And one is, we believe, is a beech, and one is a chestnut oak. And we just pause here and look at, I mean, for one, just the difference in the roots and just the presence between these two different roots of two different trees, right? What you're seeing, that if you can recall the earlier images, right, these sort of kind of like swollen dark for the beech, and this like kind of light tip coming out for the chestnut oak, that's where the mycorrhizal association likely is, right? When you kind of see a presence like that at the root, it's a good likelihood that mycorrhizae are there. It's not 100% guaranteed, but and I'll be spending the most of, you'll see just a few images, particularly from the chestnut oak, because I mean, you can add, like, just add some initial thoughts into the chat of, like, you know, what this wakes up on you. But what you see here on the left is the root, the soil, and the fungus, right? One moment of that amidst the entire life world of the earth, right? We can move on to the next slide. These are two other, you can't tell where one species ends and the other begins. So these are both the chestnut oak. And I think here we kind of really see the root, like the strength of it, right? And how it's supporting both this like soil aggregate and this mycorrhizal presence, this fungus. I recently read a beautiful essay in Orion about how each tree has its own song, and that trees are basically improvisers like Charlie Parker, whereas they know their fundamental melody of their song, and then they will infinitely improvise upon it in response to what's happening all around them. But the consistency of the song stays with them, right? The pattern of their song. And so what I'm searching for here as an artist are the songs of these entanglements as connected to very particular places and very particular trees. We can move on to the next slide. Now here we're diving more deeply into the mycelia. These are hyphae, like this is all fungus. These are all the mycelium growing all over at a different part of that same root for the chestnut oak. And if you can see right above the cross of this ruler to the right, there's that kind of more vivid hyphae coming out, and there's a little bump on it. And Jake, seeing that, was able to identify, if we can move on to the next slide and take a breath and inhale. That is a clamp connection, which means it belongs to a particular family of ectomycorrhizae, and that it is mushroom producing. Because that little physical morphology of that are those who create mushrooms, because not all fungi do. I just stay with this image and I have nothing else to say about it. This is on a cellular level. That divide there is one cell, right? So a hyphae of a mycelium is literally one cell wide. So we're at the cellular level here. This is all from a place called Buttonhook. These are ectomycorrhizal presences from 2 tree species. And they have not been quantitatively analyzed. That is not my role. But know that they are there and they are part of the forest. Another key important kind of piece is that ectomycorrhizae, as opposed to arbuscular, they are slower and they keep more carbon in the soil. And in fact, because of so many fertilizers and because of fossil fuels, which are giving a lot of nitrogen into the air, ectomycorrhizae are struggling to live and arbusculars are taking over. And arbusculars quite literally digest faster and release carbon faster. I think we are all connected to understanding why that's not a good thing. On to the next image. I'm mindful of time, so I will have to rush through a little bit of a few portions, but this is the last image here. So we've kind of been basically moving closer and closer, right, to kind of like magnification in. And this is a cross section of the root of the chestnut oak. With 400 magnification on a compound microscope. What happened here is basically, you know, it kind of looks like a crescent moon to me, and that's simply because it fell apart, right? So it's really, imagine it as a circle, and on the inside, those are all individual cells of the root and the hardegnet in this mycorrhizal association inside the root. Again, for me, this is a dream space, right? I've never been brought so close to the presences of the earth. And it's a real gift and a privilege to be able to witness it. Where specifically is a hardegnet. So it's hard to tell. It's these like dark, it's kind of that webbing, because the hardegnet also covers the whole outside of the root, as opposed to penetrating in between the cells. So it's like these little kind of mottled, dark, these things. Yeah, on to the next slide. And just as a reminder, this is the scale at which these tiny portions of the living world, of the more than human world, that we were observing. Right, so these slides are about 3 inches in length, right? So this is one moment, like a singular moment of time and place. On to the next slide. So I view this way of working as sort of the spirit of citizen science passed through the prism of embodied artistic practice in order to create a new work, which is called Soil and Spirit. It's really, I don't think science or scientific practices are really the capacity to attune ourselves across multiple ways of knowing, should be locked up in Ivy League institutions. I think they should be accessible to communities. And part of the goal of Soil and Spirit is to lead soil and mycorrhizal observation, workshops, and making of performing objects based off of these choreographies and patterns. And that'll be part of the whole of the work. But we need to get more, I need to get more resources in order to do that. So on to the next slide. So just a quick moment on this, that I hope you're getting a sense of how I'm kind of insisting on keeping a kind of a relational memory, both to the image, to any portion of this, right? That like these images, they're not just like floating out of nowhere, they came from somewhere. And that somewhere has history, has deep, profound history, has much more unknowns than knowns, has communities present and past, right? And so it's difficult, particularly I think in the fast-paced kind of like amnesia of the late stage capitalism that we're all in, to slow down and insist that we're going to weave these connections. But we are, and I am. And I invite everyone who gets involved in Soil and Spirit to commit to that practice. And I actually think it is deeply connected to the art of puppetry animation and the kind of attention, exquisite sensitivity that it brings the body to hold. Onto the next slide. And so this is from, just you kind of get a little glimpse of some of the practices being developed. This is like more academic, right? But this is from my team, our student team at Duke, and we kind of workshopped a kind of worksheet where, as we're looking for the microscope, can you reflect on like what's happening for you, right? And I just love this, like, any imaginative memory associations, bio class in 2013, dreams, and a map I drew of nonsense when I was in the 4th grade. I mean, how exquisite, right? And I think I'm suggesting that that is not outside of the image, right? That is not outside of this root soil fungal choreography. Like, it is one tiny thread of connection, and the way the relationality is created. So we can move on to the next slide. So the primary purpose and vision of Soil and Spirit is to facilitate an encounter with the spirits and histories of chosen endangered forests, with all the complexities that encounter entails across diverse people, histories, and lineages. And on to the next slide. And a different way of saying that is accessible choreographies of root soil fungi entanglements in endangered forests with sacred object and anti-colonial land ethics practice research. Just don't tell them that it's also a puppet. It is all of this. It is all of this. And yes, an artistic work can hold all of that, because art, that is what art does. And this is what my practice is. And it's weaving all of these things together. Onto the next slide. So these are the next steps, getting to the end here so we can have a good amount of time for kind of conversation. We'll be having a soil workshop and observation of soil architectures and the soil microbiome. And I will be collecting also soils from Buttonhook, as well as an old growth forest. We'll be again engaging, building my own relationship with this place. And I hope potentially Noham may join me for the soil collection. We'll see if that's possible. I think maybe I potentially invite others to that if that may be of interest. We're beginning the design phase of translating these early soil fungal root choreographies into actual design for the figure. I'm working with Chris Green, who's a fantastic animator and builder, creating and building and assembling an Indigenous and Disability Advisory Councils. So that's in the works. There are people I'm speaking with, and trusted, both trusted people whom I know and or whose work I really admire. Of course, securing funding and resources to bring Soil and Spirit programming to the Buttonhook community and then beyond it. Beyond it to the Adirondacks, beyond it to Massachusetts, beyond it to Wisconsin, and beyond it to Montana. Those are the places at the moment where my focus is. At the very end of the project, I hope that it will bring me back to Russia. Though I cannot even really imagine that right now. And of course, all of this rests upon ensuring that Buttonhook is protected, and that the school board makes the only decision that makes sense to do, which is to accept the very generous bid already put in, the only one bid that was put in. But truly, if anything, this land should just be gifted back. So let's hope they do the right thing. On to the next slide. So I bring you back to this image because a lot happened with this work for me, and for others too. And I wrote about it quite extensively in Orion magazine, and you're welcome to read that piece called Animate Earth. But the kind of listening that this work is calling for is not easy. The kind of asking for permission, especially when we exist in systems and are habituated into believing that everything is available for us. This is an active reframe from that. And it is a kind of learning. It is, and it is a slow learning, right? We also have to remember that, and Mustafa, somebody I recently met, he gave me this beautiful like gift. He said, the earth is very forgiving. And I think we have to remember that, right? That while we are grappling with immense histories of violence and the consequences of that broken agreement with the earth and the climate crisis that has come out of it, that there's also deep compassion and forgiveness within the living world. So let that guide us in finding a different way forward, right? And maybe transforming as a human culture from decomposers into symbionts, right? You know, I don't remember if I have one more slide or not. I think I do. Maybe I have two more. I have a thank you. Yes, yes, my thank you slide. With big thanks to Noham, Rolf Kasha-Chilling, of course, to Tracy, to Stacy Morgan, and everyone from the Friends of Buttonhook Forest, Victoria, and like an incredible Duke Bass team who's trusting me in this kind of wild journey into the unknown as we're grappling with this together. And Jules, who is on the call, Jake Nash, who's shared his knowledge so generously, and just everyone here in the Bass Connections team. And I think we're at the last slide then. Yeah, so thank you so much. Welcome questions. I can catch up in the chat. Oh boy, there's a lot of things in the chat. But yeah, so we have about 12 minutes, right, for a Q&A. Oh, 5 minutes. We have 5 minutes for a Q&A. The clock up above my head is a little bit ahead, it's a little bit behind. But questions, thoughts, I at least have a few minutes for an open conversation. Yeah.
Leah has a question.
Sure. I just wanted to thank you for that beautiful presentation. That was so inspiring. I've never seen microscopy work of that sort, only like the clip art images. So that was like so awesome. I also wanted to express my solidarity as someone like protecting like green space in New York City. I've been a park defender for the East River Park, which the city is completely clear cutting. So if anyone has wanted to get more involved in that, I'm like working with there's a group there called 1,000 People, 1,000 Trees. You can find them on Instagram and also Twitter. And I wrote a zine about the situation and like the history and like how the city betrayed the community boards and like the indigenous groups of the land. So I put that in the chat if anyone wants to read more, but just wanted to boost that because it's a related struggle. It's the same, land grab for, further extraction and exploitation of land that should be just given back. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, Leah, thank you so much. You were breaking up a little bit, so sorry if I cut you off. It's a really rooted struggle. I think that that's what's happening. Oh, everyone just froze. It's hard. Can you hear me? My connection. Hard to know what's happening.
Is that you at your end, Marina?
Maybe. How about I turn my video off and then I can just listen?
Anybody else have a question or comments they'd like to make? Stacy Morgan.
Yeah, oh, that was a fascinating talk. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask, what's the best way, I guess, to communicate? You know, we're so ingrained in this type of society of like, you know, we take from the land without asking. Have you experienced, you know, any sort of breakthroughs of how to communicate just how precious this is, how we should show respect and ask before we take, from your work with, you know, your long career?
Thank you so much for that question. I don't actually give space in my own, I no longer give space. I think it is much more unreasonable to think that only human beings are intelligent than to think the other way. And so I think it's just, I don't think it's an intellectual jump. I think it is truly a sensory, much deeper shift, right? And so I think the only way we can do it is by creating communities in which we are committed to a different way of being. And that is exactly what Buttonhook is doing. And that's actually what's so incredible about the organizing effort that's happening at Buttonhook. So I think it's the only way, because I don't think we can, there is no more time to give that doubt time. That time is over. Right. So that doesn't mean being rude unless that's called for, right? Because the scientific community is embedded, it is built, I mean, scientific Western knowledge is built upon a hierarchy. Human beings at the top, trickle down, right? Yeah, I think we do this with one another and then just continue like communicating outwards.
So I think we have time for one more question. Does anybody else have anything? Well, I guess then I'm just going to jump in and say, on behalf of Friends of Buttonhook Forest, Marina, this was an amazing presentation on so many levels. We're so moved and inspired by your work, and we can't wait to see how you visualize and bring this all together. But what you've given us a taste, and we can't wait to see more. And we thank you for what you bring to the whole Buttonhook Forest experience, and to the efforts to preserve it and honor it. And we're really, truly grateful. So thank you, everybody, for coming tonight, and stay tuned. There's lots more to learn and to see. So thank you, Marina.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Tracy. Good night, y'all. Feel free to email me on bodypoemspuppetry@gmail.com.
Want to put that in the chat? Put your email in the chat. One second.
Thank you again.
I have-
Good night.
There we go.
Very hesitantly formed an Instagram, even though I hate it. So you can find me on there too.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much. Good night, all.